Welcome. My name is Ian Fitzpatrick. This is a video presentation of the Fitzpatrick Clan Society on genetic genealogy. The topic of this video is early colonial American Fitzpatrick settlers. We hope this is just first of a number of presentations. Today we're going to look at some lines, and there are existing papers on some of these lines, and some of the papers are about to come in the future, but this video is just meant to be an overview of where we are with the research at this time. The lines we're going to look at in this presentation arrived in the colonies before the year 1750. These immigrants came across the Atlantic for different reasons than in later years, where people came across due to famine and religious persecution. In most cases, these first settlers were the very first Europeans to build homes on this land. It's very difficult to pinpoint exactly the precise location in Ireland these men originated from. There's very few records. But as we gradually attach DNA groups to specific lines, there's a good chance that their origins could be revealed. Slowly but surely, we're building the research and hope to meet this goal. The earliest Fitzpatrick on record I have found so far is that of Bryan Fitzpatrick. The first records show that he landed in North Carolina before 1704, most likely in the late 1600s. Next up, we have Daniel Fitzpatrick. He landed in what is today the modern Richmond, Virginia area before 1714. One of the most popular Fitzpatricks on Ancestry.com is William Fitzpatrick of Albemarle County, Virginia. Going west into Augusta County, we find Andrew Fitzpatrick. Not too far from Andrew, we have Thomas Fitzpatrick of Bath County, Virginia. And finally, Richard Fitzpatrick, who unfortunately seems to have left no legacy. And the only record to be found so far is a will when he died in 1712. Let's have a closer look at Bryan Fitzpatrick of North Carolina. Let's take a closer look at Bryan Fitzpatrick, who landed in Tyrrell County, North Carolina, probably somewhere around 1690. He left a will in 1709, listing 3 sons, and one of his sons, Cornelius, also left a will, listing 3 of his sons. What's interesting here, especially to our A1488 group, is the land that he owned and farmed way back then is even today known as Kilkenny Landing, which strongly suggests the area of Ireland where he came from. So further research into Bryan could lead to him possibly being the progenitor of the Floyd County, Kentucky A1488 Fitzpatricks, who we really haven't found a progenitor yet. So this could be interesting. So while researching Bryan, I found a very interesting ship's record. On this ship, which was called the Carolina, was a Florence O'Sullivan, and the ship stopped in Ireland and picked up what were called servants, but they were part of a surveying crew. Florence O'Sullivan was a surveyor, and also John Fitzpatrick, who went into Kentucky, was part of a surveying crew. So this connection could be a promising lead. The ship arrived in the Carolinas in 1671. So I dug a little deeper on the Bryan Fitzpatrick, who was an indentured servant to Florence O'Sullivan, and he was referred to as a noted villain. And his story was that he actually had trouble in the colony. He fled the colony and went to the Spanish and gave the Spanish a lot of information, which led to the Spanish invading the colony later on. So he appears to have been with the Spanish all the way till 1695. So this kind of eliminates him as our possible Bryan. I don't think he would have been around in the early 1700s back in Carolina. This is a tree of what we know about Bryan Fitzpatrick and his children and even his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. This is all we really know about his legacy, and it kind of stops. It's like the end. The line just pretty much stops, and the records disappear. So we're not quite sure what happened. Did he move? Did he change his name? There's a notable one in the bottom right-hand corner, Thomas Fitzpatrick, born circa 1735. We're gonna come back to him in a little while. As I said, I was unable to continue any of these lines much further than what you've seen in the previous slide. But I'd like to take this time just to veer off topic a little bit here. And let's take a look at John Fitzpatrick. He was born probably around 1690. And let's see what other people have found with him. I looked pretty hard to find records of John out of North Carolina and any traces of him, but could never find anything. And this is the problem. If you do research on Ancestry.com, is the whole copy and paste dilemma. We input John's information, his birth date, and his parents, Cornelius Fitzpatrick, Elizabeth Whitby. We find there are at least 39 trees that have sources and records. Let's have a closer look at some of these. Opening up one of these trees, it's a very nice looking presentation. The author of the tree has put in quite a bit of work. We see Bryan of Alligator Creek is there. And his parents are listed as Bryan Fitzpatrick and Catherine Everard of Ossory. This couple is listed in Ronan Fitzpatrick's pedigree on the first Baron. But that connection is not really what we're looking at. Let's look further down the tree. Let's have a closer look at the tree and the profile record of John Fitzpatrick. Right away, we see some things that don't quite make sense. His death is listed as 1780 in Albemarle, Virginia. When we look at the source record for his death in 1780, the actual record says 1695 in Longford, Ireland. So it's not really a credible source for the death of John Fitzpatrick. It's not even close. So what happens is people on Ancestry see such a nice, well put together tree, they just copy it and use it as their own and make their own connections to it. Even though the sourcing is very poor, it doesn't really make sense. And as I said, I looked forever trying to find any sort of matching records that would match up to this family, but really struggled to find any at all. I would like to point out in this tree Andrew Fitzpatrick, because we're going to come back around to him in a little while. But again, this tree just keeps going and going, has records all the way to modern times. So it's connected through multiple false sources. Once again, if we dig into the sourcing and the records used that support Andrew's history, we can see that the records just don't match up. This is a record, again, from England for a person who lived and grew up in Virginia. I just wanted to point out how important it is to do your own research and to really look at your sources and make sure that they make sense and fit But let's move on now to Daniel Fitzpatrick, who appears just outside of what is present-day Richmond, Virginia. One great source for finding the location of people are land records. The records don't have to be from that specific person. They could be from somebody else. And their name is listed as a boundary of the other person's property. This was a typical way of defining the boundaries of properties back then. These records are a wealth of information. When you look at them very closely, they describe people's names that live next door, and marriages and relationships, and there's a lot of information just in a very small record. In this one, we see he's referred to as Daniel Patrick, not Fitzpatrick, and a lot of the Fitzpatricks morphed into Patrick over time. Daniel is listed in church records for quite a number of years, contributing to the church. He seemed to be an important member of the church in St. Paul's Parish in Hanover County, Virginia, but his trail just goes cold. There are no other records I can find of him or his family. So now we come to William Fitzpatrick of Albemarle County, Virginia. There are wonderful land records for William and his sons in Albemarle County. They lived in an area known as the North Garden, which we can see today is still there. There are no Fitzpatricks in the area. I had a look, but we have great land records. The best and only paper record we have for William is his will, where he does list his two sons and his wife, Sarah. It always amazed me that from this one record, over 3,175 trees were built for William. And most of the information on these trees is incorrect. Fortunately, through DNA research and paper trails, we have built a DNA tree for William, and it's growing constantly. We're adding new people to it. This is the power of DNA versus doing research on a platform like Ancestry. And now if you want to be sure that you have your paper trail right and you do connect to William, a simple DNA test can do it. There's a paper with more details, which we'll link at the bottom of this video. Next, we're going to move on to Andrew. If you remember, we had him linked to the Cornelius or Bryan line back in North Carolina, but let's have a look at what we actually found. The internet is a powerful tool when doing genealogical research, and it has its faults with the cut and paste issues of Ancestry, but I also want to point out that it can also be a very useful tool for breaking down brick walls. In this case, a simple post on the Fitzpatrick Clan Society Facebook page led to a breakdown of a brick wall. I'd been researching Andrew for quite a while, and it had great results. It was here that I connected with Justin Fitzpatrick and his line that went up to John Fitzpatrick, and I had my suspicions it was connected to Andrew. Andrew is also connected to somebody else who had DNA tests done already. So I asked Justin if he was interested in taking a DNA test and see if we could make the connection. The story of Andrew goes like this. He received land as part of the Borden land grants. Borden was required to recruit 100 settlers within 2 years. He succeeded and patented 92,000 acres. So many of the settlers were Scotch-Irish that this area became known as the Irish Tract. Andrew was listed as residing there in 1745, according to a land record. However, life was not easy in the mid-17th century Augusta County. The area was a buffer zone between the indigenous people that had been driven off the land and the more settled areas to the east. The settlers had to live in constant fear of attack, and many moved on to more stable colonies. We have a number of records that show Andrew married a Mary Davis, but there are no records regarding his children, so for quite a while his line remained a dead end, similar to Bryan and Daniel's line. However, by 1772 it appeared he may have moved on to North Carolina. We find him on a census record and a note on the land he left that he had moved to Carolina. At the time when I first looked at this line, we had a DNA project member who had a very good paper trail to a Samuel Fitzpatrick, who also resided in North Carolina, and whose firstborn son was named Andrew. So not unreasonable speculation that they could be father and son, but without a solid paper connection, the lead was stuck in limbo for years. Then along came Justin's post on Facebook, and we found the paper trail connected to a John Fitzpatrick, who also resided in the same region at the same time. The research led to one incredible paper connection between a John and a Samuel. John was married to Sarah East, and she was alive in 1860, living with a Samuel at the ripe old age of 106 years old. She had made a type of deposition when she applied in 1838 for a pension related to the Revolutionary War. Since the records of who fought in the war were so poor, it took a number of stories and witness statements to make a claim. The entire statement is very long and detailed, but the key mention in all of the detail is the mention of John's brother being a Samuel. Was the Samuel mentioned the same one as linked to our DNA project member? It seemed to be so, but these mere mentions are really not 100% reliable. But now we had someone who had a great paper trail leading up to John and Sarah East, and another with a paper trail to Samuel and Sarah Davis. Would the DNA link the two men? Well, a big Y test sealed the deal, and we now connected the two sons of Andrew to each other. This tree is from a large haplogroup in the Fitzpatrick DNA project, and it shows DNA-linked ancestors of modern-day Fitzpatricks. All of these men share a common ancestor, and we now know this. We know this group as a DNA mutation referred to as BY12234. But note, there's a familiar face on the tree. William of Albemarle County is also related to Andrew. Did they know each other? Probably not. They shared ancestry back to about the year 1400, so they may not have known each other in Ireland or in the colonies. An amazing DNA connection between these two early colonial settler lineages. I'll be releasing a paper in the coming weeks that goes into more detail about Andrew's story and the story of his descendants. We next take a look at Thomas Fitzpatrick of Bath County. I'm going to speculate a connection here, and hopefully maybe in the near future we can end up connecting the modern day lines to prove that this connection is real. But let's take a jump forward and have a look at some of the hints that I've used to speculate this connection. There is a very large group within the project of DNA-related men that trace their ancestry to John Fitzpatrick of Floyd County, Kentucky. They have a great paper history along with an oral history that suggests that John originated in Bath County, Virginia before his move to Kentucky circa 1790. The records in Bath County have yet to reveal anything to make the connection. From the annals of Bath County, we do have a mention that in 1746, a Thomas Fitzpatrick had land laid out by a survey team in what was referred to and is presently known as the cow pasture. This area would eventually become Bath County, Virginia. So stay with me here. The connections are there, but they're still very speculative. So along with Thomas, There was a John listed in the list of titleables in 1783 Bath County. We have a number of records that show a John Fitzpatrick being part of an early survey crew that entered into what would become Kentucky. He worked for a man who was quite famous, actually. His name was Captain Thomas Bullitt. Thomas Bullitt received a land grant in 1766 for land in what's known as Healing Springs and Warm Springs, which is very close to the land that Thomas Fitzpatrick first settled in cow pasture. This is a long way around to show that the John Fitzpatrick of Kentucky could have been the son of Thomas Fitzpatrick who first settled the cow pasture in Bath County. So to further speculate, I could go on and connect the line of Bryan Fitzpatrick through Cornelius's and down to Thomas Fitzpatrick, who we have no records for. We just don't know where he went. But we could speculate that there is a chance that he was an A1488 Fitzpatrick and was the ancestor of the Floyd County Fitzpatricks. We might be able to make the connection, but without a good solid paper trail and other DNA connections, it's not possible to be 100% sure. So this will remain speculation. There are quite possibly other Fitzpatrick lines that came into the colonies before 1750, and just for so many reasons, they're just not yet discovered. There is a Richard Fitzpatrick. His only legacy is the record of his will. He had no named family. I'm sure there are many others who left no paper trails at all, or the line just ended. But through the power of signs and DNA, there's still a chance that we could tell their story. I was about to wrap up this presentation, and just to illustrate how making assumptions, some that you've convinced yourself are pretty much facts, can all fall apart with a little bit of DNA and new facts. What I had written about earlier needs to be revised. Several months ago, I was helping a project member that had the surname Patrick, and they were researching their Patrick tree, which they had connected to the Bryan Fitzpatrick in North Carolina at Alligator Creek. They found a Patrick male to do a Y-DNA test, and when the results came in, they matched several Patrick surname men, quite a number, but they didn't match any of the Fitzpatrick lines at all. The Patrick line they connected to seemed to be a Scottish Patrick line, a U106 Patrick line, and there was quite a bit of documentation, and armed with new information from their DNA results, they were able to move past the misleading ancestry information, and they have now made a solid connection to this other Patrick line. We had a big Y test come in on another Patrick man just recently, and when I looked at his paper trail, it was very solid to a John Patrick in Tyrrell County, Alligator Creek area, which was the same, pretty much the same man as the other Patrick line, the U106 Patrick line. So this didn't make sense. They both connected to the same man. It was very confusing. And when I looked in more detail, there were two marriage records of John Patrick within 2 years, being married again within 2 years, which wasn't unusual. Women died during childbirth. It was quite common, and it was common then for a man to remarry shortly after he'd just been married. Knowing that there were two completely unrelated DNA lines leading up to the same man, it gives a different perspective, because the DNA doesn't tell lies. And so taking a step back, I found a John A. Patrick and a John G. Patrick. And they could have been the sons of the other John Patrick. So we had two sons of two John Patricks. And if you look at the marriage record, one was married to Penny Gray and the other to Anne Alexander. So when you look at census records, you found that these two men went by different names. John A, and probably A for Alexandra Patrick, John Alexander Patrick, and the other was John G. Patrick or John Gray Patrick. And this all makes sense now, that there were actually two completely unrelated Patrick lines. So now the puzzle pieces seem to fit together. These are two Patrick lines that are two separate DNA haplogroups. One we know connects to what seems to be a line out of Scotland, and the other we're not quite sure. Well, now we have another possible connection to the Alligator Creek Fitzpatricks. More work needs to be done to find possible connections to glue them together and make it a solid connection, but there is a possible link that lines up very well. So now we might have a connection here between the Alligator Creek Fitzpatricks and this new CTS 2457 Patrick line. Is this Thomas Fitzpatrick and this Thomas Patrick the same man? There are paper sources for a Thomas Fitzpatrick. He was orphaned. His father was named Cornelius Fitzpatrick. He died in 1766. And a bond was issued to make sure he was looked after. There's also a census record from Tyrrell County in 1786 for a Thomas Fitzpatrick. And on the other side, a Thomas Patrick is listed on a marriage bond, and at the time you had to put money up to get married. And he is the possible father of John Patrick, whose bride was Penny Gray. And this could connect the two lines. It definitely fits the puzzle quite well, but of course more work is needed to make this a solid link. So we will continue with the work. The value of building trees that are based on both DNA and historical records is very obvious. The DNA allows us to look at things with a view that the paper sources just do not give us. DNA can make connections that paper just cannot. It can make sense out of the confusion. It's just an invaluable tool in research. So thank you very much for taking your time to watch this. Any questions or comments can be entered below or on our Fitzpatrick Clan Facebook page or on the FTDNA Fitzpatrick DNA Project activity feed. We encourage everyone to ask questions, give us input, ask for help, whatever you need, we're there to help you out. So thank you again, and I hope you enjoyed the video.